Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game pod from an exciting Timberwolves comeback win on Tuesday night against the LA Clippers. We're going to talk about Ant's massive performance and the two role players that came up huge in the game. The Wolves sorely needed them. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code, all lowercase, LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day. And it is a victory Wednesday. It's a big Timberwolves win over the Clippers on Tuesday night. Down 22 in the first half. The Wolves come back and win this thing by 20. I mean, it was incredible. There's a lot to get to. And I hosted the postcast with Jack Borman last night, or I guess early this morning. The Wolves ended up winning by 18. Sorry, not 20. And that was a ton of fun. Reacted to it immediately afterwards. So appreciate it if you tuned into that. I'm going to try and give some additional context, some unique thoughts here on the show today. The next show in your feed today, though, is going to be the Minnesota basketball party. Myself, Jack will be back. And it'll also be Sam Ekstrom, Ron Johnson, the Ron Johnson Show, and Reggie Wilson from Care 11 TV. And we're going to talk, obviously, Wolves Clippers, a lot of other Wolves topics as well. We'll talk Rudy. So make sure to tune into that, too. So lots of shows in your feed today. And I guess I'll be on all of them. So hopefully that's a good thing. All right. So a lot to get to here today on the show. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. All right, so we could start in a number of places. I want to start with kind of chronologically what I felt happened in this game quickly, like, not like a blow by blow, but like here's essentially the game flow. The Wolves come out completely flat, and offensively on their first possession, they get 3 cracks at it, right? Like they actually got a ton of offensive rebounds overall in this game. They had 19, which is insane for a team that really doesn't offensive rebound the ball all that well or all that frequently. And they just couldn't make a shot. And then as the first quarter wore on, it was more of the same. They were just missing open shots. They were getting multiple opportunities, but not coming through. And it was a pretty, I would say, flat quarter for Minnesota. And defensively, they were just as bad. And I mean, Rudy's played in this game, mind you. Like, remember Sunday, no Rudy, no Kyle Anderson. Those guys played in this game. Ant was questionable coming in. Of course, he was always going to play because, Ant plays when he's questionable. And the Wolves gave up 34 in the first quarter to the Clippers. And offensively, they only scored 21. And it actually could have been way worse. I think Minnesota had 7 turnovers, if I'm not mistaken, in the first quarter alone. They also had multiple offensive rebounds, but just could not convert. Second chance points weren't good early either for Minnesota. And defensively, it was blow-bys. It was Rudy. Rudy was a full step slow in this game early. He looked like he was not with it. I don't know if it was physically, like he didn't play Sunday. Maybe there was, I don't know, that would be rust having not played in 3 days or 4 days, I guess. But just like took him a minute to get going. And eventually he ended up having a good game. But it was a rough start for Rudy. It was a rough start for the Wolves perimeter defenders. And it was 34-21 at the end of the first quarter. And this, my biggest thing is a step slow defensively and missing open shots offensively. I actually thought the offensive flow was pretty good. Ant wasn't getting too locked in on, ISO ball, having tunnel vision or anything early. Like the ball movement was solid. It was really just missing those open shots and a lack of effort defensively. Midway through the second quarter, this became a 22-point game. Actually, a little past the midway point, like at the 5, it was the 5-something mark when this was a 22-point game. 22-point game at the 5:13 mark in the second quarter. And then the Wolves all of a sudden go on this run. They score 10 straight. and overall a 20-2 run in the second quarter. And the Timberwolves find themselves suddenly down just 4, and Ty Lue just didn't call a timeout because, I get it. I mean, it was close to the half, right? Like, you just limped to the half with the double-digit lead, and then all of a sudden in like a 30-second span, literally, it was, I guess, a 40-second span. It was Ant makes a shot, Zubats misses a shot, Alexander Walker makes a three-pointer. He had a crazy game. We'll talk about him. And Jordan McLaughlin gets a steal. Ant hits another 3. The Wolves are within 4, and the Clippers have to call a timeout. They score 4 straight to put themselves back up 8 at halftime. But that was when the game really turned. And it was also about when we learned that Kawhi Leonard had left the arena with back spasms and just left because I guess he didn't want to sit in the locker room, and sitting makes it worse or whatever. But anyway, he just left. And so the Wolves knew they had no Kawhi to deal with, and they were within 8 at halftime after trailing by 22. And they come out and just dominate the rest of the game. They gave up 15 points in the third quarter of this game to the Clippers. Just 15 points in the third quarter after giving up 34 in the first quarter. Overall, in the first half, the Wolves gave up 63 points. In the second half, they gave up just 37 points and held the Clippers to 100 points. And the Clippers only got there in garbage time because of, I don't know. I guess they got there because of garbage time. It was disjointed, and they probably still shouldn't have gotten there. But I mean, this is a top 5 offensive team coming in. And granted, the Wolves held them to 89 a week and a half ago, but it's a top 5 offensive team that doesn't have problems scoring. I know Kawhi missed 3 quarters, but like, you still got to slow down Paul George and James Harden and Norman Powell, who kills the Wolves and a lot of guys. He kills a lot of teams this year. And they did it. I mean, the night and day difference between the first quarter defense and the third quarter defense was incredible. Jack and I talked on the postcast about the Wolves switching a bunch on the perimeter, which, they don't prefer to do a lot of the time, but the Clippers are a team that makes sense to do that against. And it worked. And the Wolves were, for as inactive as they were early in the game, they were extremely active defensively late. I mean, that's what it was. Like, it was just activity. And they also forced a bunch of turnovers, which was related to that. And then, as the game, fourth quarter, LA hung around for a little bit. The Wolves started fouling a bit too much, but that's the way the Wolves want to play defensively, right? Like, we talked about this on the show Tuesday. The Wolves' defensive free throw rate is plummeting, like going in the wrong direction. It was top 10 for, midway through the season, like literally. And now it's 19th, according to Basketball Reference. And that happened a little bit toward the end of this game, but that's their game, right? The Wolves want to play physically on defense. They want to play physically, and they want to force the officials to blow their whistles. I think the frustration for Minnesota mostly comes from not getting the calls on the other end. Like in this game, the Clippers shot 25 free throws. The Wolves only shot 14. It wasn't poorly officiated, I don't think. I think this was much more a case of the way the Clippers were playing offensively and the way the Wolves were playing defensively than anything else. But that's going to be something the Wolves are going to have to deal with. And for the most part this year, the Wolves have gotten to the line quite a bit. They're 6th in the league in free throw rate offensively, which is great. But defensively, they got a little foul happy late. It let the Clippers hang around, but then eventually the Wolves pulled away, got up 20 plus, and there truly was 3 minutes of garbage time, 4 minutes of garbage time at the end of the game. So a really, really, really strong in-game pivot for Minnesota. It really was not a tale of two halves, like a tale of a quarter and a half and then 2.5 quarters of a completely different basketball team for both teams. And no doubt the Kawhi leaving thing had a negative effect on the Clippers. I'm sure that messes with your head if your best player is like just up and out kind of suddenly. But I mean, the Wolves didn't have Karl-Anthony Towns. The Wolves still didn't have Monte Morris. We'll talk about Jordan McLaughlin. He played well in Morris's stead. Like, this was just really impressive the way the Wolves flipped things midstream. And a lot of it was the switching defense. We'll talk about the lineup changing here, or the lineup change that Chris Finch made as well. We'll talk about that here in a minute. And then I want to get to some role player discussion because it was fantastic in this game. We'll talk about him, but Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Mike Conley, Jordan McLaughlin, the difference in the first and second halves of Jaden McDaniels, all those things are things we need to cover because those guys collectively, which I realize is like half the rotation, but those are the guys that flipped this game around for Minnesota mid-game. So we'll get to all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. As you're well aware, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. And baseball fans, mark your calendars for March 20th. That's 1 week from today at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central for the best MLB season preview coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. March 20th at 7 Eastern, 6 Central. Be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. You'll find it on March 20th at 7 Eastern, 6 Central on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All right. I think we talk about the rotation tweaks that Chris Finch made mid-game. Early in the game, Kyle Anderson and the Wolves, quote unquote, big lineup with Slow-Mo at the 4 was getting killed by the Clippers and on both ends of the floor. And Slow-Mo was trying to guard. Well, actually, really, he was on Kawhi for stretches. He was on PG for stretches early. And the two main differences between the first quarter and the third quarter were the Timberwolves started the third quarter. Slow-Mo actually technically started the third quarter because Ant was late coming to the floor after halftime. But then as soon as Ant came back, Slow-Mo left the floor. Alexander Walker stayed on. So the differences were Alexander Walker in the game instead of Kyle Anderson and no Kawhi Leonard from the first to the third quarter. Those were the primary differences. And LA scored 34 points in the first and 15 in the third. Going with the smaller lineup and sliding Jaden McDaniels to the 4, which we talked about this the other day on the show. Slow-Mo's best position is the 4 and Jaden McDaniels' best position is the 3. But in this game against this particular team and with the way that this game was playing out, putting Slow-Mo on the bench and having him come off the bench as effectively a backup point guard or a co-backup point guard with Jordan McLaughlin was the right move. And allowing Jaden McDaniels to slide and play the 4 offensively at least, because with the way McDaniels is playing right now, and this is the key really. The reason this worked to the tune of 40 whatever wins the Wolves had last year, 43 or 40. How did they win? 44 games or something? 43, I think. Doesn't matter. The reason that worked better last year with Slow-Mo at the 4 and McDaniels at the 3 is because Jaden McDaniels shot at a 40% clip from 3 last year. This year, McDaniels is hovering around 35, and he's missed his last, I think, 11 3-pointers. He was 0-4 from 3 in this game. He was 0-5 on Sunday. Does not look comfortable at all. So you effectively have 3 non-shooters on the floor with Gobert, McDaniels, and Anderson. So you're relying on Anthony Edwards to create and Mike Conley to spot up, and that's it. There's no spacing. You could put Kyle Anderson in the corner all day, and teams aren't going to respect him. That's another difference from last year. Last year, even though he only shot a little more than 1 3 per game, he was 40% plus from the corners. And that's not happening this year. So that's going to really hurt the Wolves spacing too. Kyle Anderson is still a good player. I want to be clear about that. And we talked about this on the postcast, and we'll talk in a minute about him with the bench unit. But the spacing when Kyle Anderson and McDaniels become non-shooters, which last year they were not non-shooters, that wrecks everything, especially with no Karl-Anthony Towns. So by swapping out Alexander Walker for Kyle Anderson, yes, you get smaller. First of all, that didn't really matter because the Wolves were a plus 14 on the glass and got 19 offensive rebounds in this game. It may matter depending on the matchup, but you get smaller, you get a bit quicker on the perimeter, but you also add another shooter. Alexander Walker was obviously extremely hot in this game. He was shot 5 of 6 from deep, 9 of 10 overall from the field. But he just provides, even when he's not shooting 5 of 6, he's still a good enough 3-point shooter that teams have to respect him. It's not Kyle Anderson, and it's not this version of Jaden McDaniels. Alexander Walker is up to 38.4% this year as a 3-point shooter. And I know I had said only a couple weeks ago, not long after the All-Star break, he was struggling, especially from above the break on 3-pointers. And I was worried that he was going to become more of the shooter he was pre-Minnesota than the shooter he's been since he's been in Minnesota. And he's flipped that around very quickly. And this game, obviously, going 5 of 6 is going to help that percentage. But being able to spread the floor with Conley and Alexander Walker, and obviously you still have Rudy and his gravity, and then you have Anthony Edwards. That is a winning proposition compared to trotting slow-mo out there with non-shooters and Rudy and this version of Jaden McDaniels. So that was an extremely smart tweak by Chris Finch. And I know it's easy for people on Twitter to be like, oh, why didn't Finch do this sooner? It's not quite that easy, right? And he started to make that shift in the second quarter. And we saw McLaughlin struggled a little bit in his first stint before then he ended up kind of keying that Wolves run in the second quarter. But essentially, Kyle Anderson and Jordan McLaughlin were sharing playmaking duties with that second unit. And really, the offense was more running through Kyle Anderson. They love to put him in the middle of the floor. He loves to go to the nail and distribute. And that's also where he's most effective offensively. It's almost what the Wolves have done with Cat in the past. Not that teams are going to double team slow-mo, but it allows him to see the whole floor. It allows him to switch sides of the floor to make the defense switch sides of the floor. And then if they don't respect him at all, Slow-mo could take a dribble and hit a 10-footer. He could hit a floater. He could draw a foul. He could do all those things. We saw him do that in the second half of this game too. So that's the best use for Kyle Anderson. And I thought that rotation tweak by Chris Finch was really astute and done at the right time and all of the above. So that was really, really good. Let's talk role players beyond Kyle Anderson. I want to start with the less obvious, which is Jaden McDaniels, because he's not going to be a stud or a dud for me in this game. He was going to be a dud, but he turned it around defensively in the second half. He only played 23 minutes. He was scoreless. He only had four rebounds in 23 minutes. Isn't bad for McDaniels. But defensively, he put on a clinic in the third quarter. And Anthony Edwards was probably the Wolves' best defensive player on the floor in this game. So that's why I'm not giving McDaniels a stud or a dud. I'm just pointing out that for as bad as he's been offensively of late, and as bad as he looked early in this game defensively, and I don't think he looked good early in this game defensively, and I think he's had some issues lately. He flipped a switch too. Like, he came along for the party in the second half and was locked in defensively. And I want to point that out because McDaniels has struggled a bit lately, and the Wolves need him. We talked about that on, I think it was Tuesday's show, about how they need McDaniels to knock down open threes offensively. But he brought his defense to the party in this game. And hopefully 3 days off, he can clear his head and get back at it against the Jazz. Lower pressure situation, not national TV. You're in Salt Lake City, a team you should beat. Let's get McDaniels back rolling again. But I thought it was nice to see him turn it on defensively in the second half. But let's talk about the guys that really did crush it. And let's start with Nickeil Alexander-Walker. 28 points on 9 of 10 shooting in this game for Nickeil. 5 of 6 outside the arc. Got to the line 6 times too. And really, it started in the second quarter. Actually, it really started in the first quarter. Alexander Walker was like taking the ball to the rim when the Wolves only scored 21 points in the frame. Ant wasn't doing a whole lot. Nobody else was doing anything on defense, and offensively, just nothing. Again, the missing open shots. Alexander Walker put his head down and got to the rim a couple of times in the first quarter and looked like he was like ready to play early in this game. And that never stopped. He was aggressive going to the basket. I mean, how many games does Nickeil shoot 4 of 4 from 2-point range and get to the line 6 times? Not very often. He's usually a catch and shoot 3-point shooter. It doesn't do a whole lot else in terms of getting into the paint or anything like that. I'm going to see, like, real quick. I'm going to back that up with this 3-point rate. I got it right here. Yeah, 62%, including this game. So this is after this game on Basketball Reference. Nickeil Alexander-Walker attempts 62% of his shots from outside the arc. And, that trend holds up in this game because he shot the ball 10 times and 6 of them were threes. So right in line with that. But we don't usually see this volume. We don't usually see him shoot 4 2-point shots in a game and get to the line 6 times, right? So a very impressive game from Nickeil. He was shot ready the whole game, made threes from everywhere, but his 3-point shooting from the corners was awesome. And, pitched in a little bit of in other areas. They needed him to rebound a little bit. He had 3 boards in 28 minutes, which is fine. Only turned it over twice. And also, he didn't have to initiate a whole lot. Like, we saw him do that a bit on Sunday when McLaughlin wasn't playing very well. We've seen the Wolves go to him as a backup point guard before this season. But with both McLaughlin and Kyle Anderson playing well in the second half, they just kind of kept going to the well with with Alexander Walker as a catch and shoot 3-point shooter. And that worked out extremely well for the Wolves in this game. He ended up with 28, second on the team in scoring, and was massive early, keeping the Wolves in the game, like allowing them to hang around, and was huge late as the Wolves pulled away. Nickeil's not going to score 28 every night. He's not going to get up 10 shots every night. He's not going to go 5 of 6 from 3 every night. But the confidence that he showed and also the ability to put the ball on the floor when needed, those are other elements like Alexander Walker, Conley, McDaniels. These are the guys that all their volume is going to increase just a little. Yes, Ant's volume is going to increase, but I mean, it's always going to get his shots regardless, right? It's not going to increase that dramatically. It's the other guys that have to be able to do just enough to draw the defense isn't going to go guard Alexander Walker, Jaden McDaniels, and sag off of Anthony Edwards. That's not going to happen. They're not Karl-Anthony Towns. They're not going to turn into Karl-Anthony Towns. What they need to be able to do is use Ant's gravity and Rudy's gravity to be able to punish teams when they are doubling Ant or when they are playing Rudy's dive to the rim. And knowing that they're not, they're never going to be the ones to allow Ant to get single coverage, right? They're not going to bend the defense the other way. They need to punish the defense when they're loading up on Ant or when they're, collapsing on Rudy in the paint, whatever that is. It's McDaniels, it's Conley, it's Alexander Walker. And offensively, Alexander Walker and Conley came through in a big way in this game. I want to talk about Conley next. We'll close with studs and duds, and we'll peek ahead at what's next for the Wolves. All that is upcoming here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. You pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch your winnings roll in. It's demon time on Prize Picks right now. You can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Demons and Goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins get you different payouts. You can now win up to 100 times your money, again, with as little as 4 correct picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA, code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends at Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you could still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right. There's no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. All right, let's close here with studs and duds today. Actually, let's talk about Conley first, who actually, he falls in the stud category. So this is both, I guess. Mike Conley, 23 points. And it was actually a relatively, it's funny, until the fourth quarter, Conley was relatively unassuming in this game, as he often is. Jack and I noticed on the postcast, I scrolled through Conley's game log while we were live on the postcast and realized that the Wolves have only lost 4 games this year when Mike Conley scored in double figures. There's something like, I don't know, like 15-4 or something like that, with Mike Conley scoring in double figures. The last time the Wolves lost a game when he scored in double figures was December 26th. Okay. Now, he's been scoring in double figures a little less than he was early in the season, but still, we're talking almost 3 months ago, Christmas, right? When Conley has that aggressive element to his game, it adds a whole new dynamic to the Wolves offense. And I know he's not going to put the ball on the floor and be ultra aggressive in the paint, but he did have 7 2-point attempts in this game, which is good to see because he's not just shooting mid-range jumpers, right? He's shooting floaters or he's getting into the paint. And the floater hasn't been as good this year, but he did get to the rim a couple of times in this game. He also, the confidence level on the jumper, and actually I say that, he did shoot a couple of technically mid-range jumpers in this game because he made 2 shots with his foot on the line that should have been 3-pointers. So 2 of those 7 2-point attempts at least, and 2-point makes were foot on the line, nearly 3-point attempts. Jack actually noted, again, live on the postcast, we were going through his game log, and Jack is pretty sure that this is the most shots Conley's ever attempted in a game in a Wolves uniform. And it certainly is this year. I looked at this year's game log, and Conley had not attempted 15 or more shots in a game this year for the Wolves. And Jack, at a quick glance, said he didn't last year either. So, high usage Mike Conley is not something that's going to happen every night. but it's more likely to need to happen sans Karl-Anthony Towns. And I mean, look, the Ant got up 29 shots. Nobody else shot the ball more than 15 times. Conley was second in shot attempts. And then the next most shot attempts was Alexander Walker at 10, which is about right. Like you're going to need Ant to shoot 25 plus times a game right now. And you're going to need, Rudy only had 7 shot attempts and didn't get to the line. It was a little bit of a weird Rudy game. But you're going to need 2-3 guys that are in that 10 to 15 shot range. And for the most part, it's going to be Rudy. It's going to be Conley, and it's going to be either McDaniels or Alexander Walker. And again, McDaniels was 0 of 8 in this game, but that's the type of performance the Wolves need from Mike Conley. And he was like, as soon as he touched the ball, it was going up not late in the fourth quarter, kind of mid fourth quarter. But he did work early. Like during that Wolves run, he had a couple of big shots, and then he had a couple of timely shots as the Wolves were trying to put the game away as well. So a very impressive game overall for Mike Conley. And he is one of the studs for this one. 23 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, 5 of 8 from 3, 9 of 15 outside the arc, only 1 turnover for Minnesota Mike. Let's talk about Ant. We've gone long enough. Ant had 37 on 15 of 29. I said this earlier. He wasn't super high usage early in the game. He tried to jack up a couple of threes, like almost trying to kind of shoot the Wolves back into it, like will them back into the game. That didn't work. It ended up being defense turning into offense, transition points, paint points, etc. Second chance opportunities. And then once the Wolves were like back in the game, that's when Ant took over. It was third and fourth quarter Ant that just dominated. In second quarter, he was part of that run, to be clear. But then he could go back to ISO ball and take some tough shots. And it was the pacing of the game made a little bit more sense. It felt a little bit less urgent. And Ant crushed it late in this game, doing exactly that, playing some ISO ball, scoring in a variety of ways. He had that pickpocket on Paul George, which was just phenomenal to see him lock in on Paul George. And I said this on the postcast, but right when Reggie Miller on the TNT broadcast says, "Oh, this is what I love about Ant. He can be a dog defensively." He locks down Paul George, gets a steal. Nas scoops it up, throws it to Ant. Ant gets a layup going the other way. It was perfect. The timing of that and the way that played out. Just a really strong Anthony Edwards performance. 8 rebounds, 4 assists, only 2 turnovers in this game as we see that turnover rate continue to come down for Anthony Edwards. He had that, 44 points, no turnovers a couple games ago. I mean, we're seeing Anthony Edwards start to figure it out when it comes to, and we said this at this time last year, and there's been peaks and valleys, but it's almost like every year in March, the last 3 seasons at least, he kind of starts to level up. And then he plays that way through the end of the season. And then he kind of comes back down to like a baseline at the start of the next season, middle of the next season. And then he levels up beyond where he was the last year, right? I'm not saying he's like 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. I'm saying he's taking 3 steps forward, 1 step back. And then he takes another 3 steps forward, 1 step back at the start of the next season. That's what it feels like. Like it's like literally like he's climbing a staircase. And every year in March, he gets better. And then he doesn't quite hold that level. But then the following March, he's better than that, right? That's what this feels like. And that's what we're seeing right now from Anthony Edwards. 37, 8, and 4, only 2 turnovers, shot better than 50% from the field, was only 2 of 8 outside the arc in this game. And he was started 5 of 5 from the line, missed his last 2 free throws when the game was all but decided. But a really strong, well-rounded Anthony Edwards performance. And I said this in passing earlier, but he was probably the Wolves' best defender in this game. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is my third stud. I already spent a lot of time on him. Not much more to say there other than he was great. I don't really have any duds in this game. I mean, for as bad as the Wolves started, like I know McDaniels was 0 of 8, but he was good defensively. I don't have it in me to give him a dud. Kyle Anderson, same thing. Horrible first half, but he finished 10, 7, and 5 in this game. Only 2 turnovers. I thought he was good defensively overall, especially in that second half. Rudy was not himself in the first half. Started to play great and then left with the bruise. The Wolves are calling a rib contusion. I mean, 3 days off. He's going to want to play in Utah on Saturday. So we'll see. But it seems like a decent shot he plays. But he had 8 and 11 plus 2 steals, 2 blocks, 3 assists. It ended up being a good Rudy game. Like all 3 of those guys, McDaniels, Anderson, Gobert, were duds in the first half. They all came back and played well in the second half. Nas had a quiet game. I thought he was effective. I thought he did enough on the glass. It was just a quiet scoring game after dropping, whatever he had on Sunday. He only had 6 points in this one and missed all 3 of his 3-point attempts. But I thought he looked good. Those shots all pretty much went in and out. Again, active on the glass, 3 assists. Not a bad Nas game by any stretch. So, and I should mention Jordan McLaughlin. I briefly mentioned him earlier. He had 6 rebounds in 17 minutes. He was third on the team in rebounding behind Rudy and Anthony Edwards. McLaughlin also had 2 assists, 2 steals, 1 block, no turnovers, was 2 of 3 shooting, including one of those late look layups that he used to do with D'Angelo Russell. And I can't remember. I think it was Alexander Walker that passed it to him, or maybe it was Kyle Anderson. And he didn't shoot any threes in this game. McLaughlin didn't. He was a team high plus 24. Ant was a plus 22. McLaughlin was a plus 24. So great game from Jordan McLaughlin. All right. That's all I have on this one. If you missed the postcast, check out me and Jack. That was the episode before this. Minnesota basketball party is the episode after this. Wolves don't play again until Saturday night at Utah. That's an 8:30 p.m. Central tip. We'll have a live postcast on the Locked On Sports Minnesota feed for that game. And then I'll be back on Monday. That'll essentially be a post-game pod from Saturday's game. So on Monday, I'll talk about the Jazz game. The next couple of days, some bigger picture stuff to get to. We're going to talk about more rotation data, some lineup data. So we'll do that here in the next couple of days. But again, check out Minnesota basketball party later today as well. That's all we have for you today here on the show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.